Debt was once temporary, a bridge between need and repayment, a mechanism designed to be crossed, fulfilled, and then dismantled. Borrow, allocate, repay, return to balance. Debt implied an ending. It implied resolution. It assumed closure. The obligation had a life cycle, a beginning, a middle, an end. Today, that assumption no longer holds. Debt is no longer temporary. It is permanent, not because repayment is impossible, but because repayment is no longer required for the system to function. The system does not demand closure. It demands continuity. This transformation did not occur through a single decision. There was no announcement, no declaration, no moment when permanence was formally approved. It emerged gradually, through architecture, through incentives, through repeated responses to crisis. Each intervention solved an immediate problem. Each solution left a residue. Over time, that residue became structure. This briefing examines the financial architecture behind permanent debt and explains how borrowing stopped being a temporary condition and became infrastructure. Permanent debt is not defined by default. It is defined by rollover. Debt does not end. It circulates, it matures, and it is replaced. Governments refinance obligations indefinitely. Principal is rarely retired. Maturity is extended. Interest is serviced. Old obligations are closed only to be reopened immediately under new terms. Continuity replaces completion. Debt no longer resolves. It persists. This persistence is not accidental. It is intentional. The architecture is designed to sustain it. This architecture begins with sovereign issuance. States do not borrow like households. They do not borrow like firms. They issue instruments designed for markets that assume continuity rather than repayment. Debt is issued in domestic currency, or in markets that implicitly assume institutional support. Issuance becomes a policy instrument, not a constraint. Governments borrow to stimulate growth, to smooth economic cycles, to stabilize markets during stress, to signal credibility, to manage expectations. Borrowing aligns with objectives, not with limits. Debt capacity is no longer defined by repayment schedules. It is defined by confidence. Confidence in rollover, confidence in liquidity, confidence in institutional backstops, confidence that refinancing will always be available. Rollover mechanisms sit at the core of this system. Bonds mature, new bonds replace them. Markets do not price redemption, they price rollover risk. As long as liquidity exists, repayment remains theoretical. The expectation is not that debt will be paid down. The expectation is that it will be refinanced, repeatedly, indefinitely. The system is engineered to refinance itself. Central banks provide the stabilizing layer beneath this structure. They do not openly cancel debt. They do not directly fund governments. They shape conditions through asset purchase programs, through repo facilities, through standing liquidity operations, through collateral frameworks, through forward guidance. They stabilize demand for sovereign paper. They suppress volatility. They anchor expectations. This does not eliminate risk. It transforms it. Market risk becomes policy risk. Price discovery becomes conditional. Volatility becomes a governance issue rather than a market outcome. Monetary policy synchronizes with fiscal expansion. Interest rates decline. Servicing costs fall. Balance sheets expand. Debt capacity appears elastic. Constraints shift again. They move away from arithmetic toward credibility. Not how much can be repaid, but how much can be rolled. Financial intermediaries amplify permanence. Banks, investment funds, insurance companies, pension systems, shadow institutions. They hold sovereign debt not primarily for yield, but for function. Debt becomes collateral. It anchors liquidity. It stabilizes leverage. It underwrites repo markets. It supports margin systems. It enables balance sheet expansion. It becomes plumbing. Removing it would destabilize everything connected to it. Leverage cycles reinforce permanence. Debt supports asset prices. Rising asset prices justify additional borrowing. Valuations expand. Collateral grows. Liquidity deepens. The system feeds itself. Any contraction threatens balance sheets, threatens market confidence, threatens political stability. The cost of retrenchment rises. Retrenchment becomes unacceptable. Global demand sustains this loop. Central banks accumulate reserves. Regulatory frameworks privilege sovereign paper. Liquidity regulations treat it as risk-free. Financial institutions require safe assets. Sovereign debt fulfills these structural needs, not just by financing governments, but by anchoring the entire financial system. It becomes the reference asset, the benchmark, the foundation of pricing and risk management. Inflation becomes the primary adjustment mechanism, rather than default, rather than restructuring. Systems dilute obligations over time. Real burdens decline gradually. Nominal continuity remains intact. Adjustment is silent, distributed, politically manageable. No single decision, no single vote. Just erosion through prices. Crises accelerate entrenchment. Emergency borrowing becomes routine. Temporary programs persist. Extraordinary measures normalize. Balance sheets settle at higher plateaus. Each crisis resets the baseline upward. What was once unthinkable becomes standard. Exit strategies are discussed. Normalization is promised, rarely delivered. Continuation becomes the default. Policy incentives align toward permanence. Retiring debt tightens liquidity. Tight liquidity destabilizes markets. Market instability threatens governance. Governance prioritizes stability. Permanence follows. This architecture disciplines behavior. Governments with market access avoid disruptive reform. Markets anticipate intervention. Risk premiums compress. Expectations stabilize. Feedback loops reinforce continuity. The system rewards predictability over correction. Critically, permanence is not universal. It favors issuers with monetary sovereignty, with deep and liquid markets, with institutional credibility. With reserve currency status, others remain constrained. They face rollover risk, conditional support, external discipline. They cannot rely on infinite refinancing. Hierarchy persists. Permanent debt intersects with everything. Shadow banking relies on sovereign collateral. Repo markets depend on it. Offshore systems park surplus capital around it. Governance networks stabilize expectations about it. It is the substrate beneath scale. the quiet foundation supporting leverage, liquidity, and policy reach. Understanding this system is essential, not to moralize debt, not to condemn it, not to celebrate it, but to recognize structure, because permanence is not accidental, it is designed, and design shapes outcomes. Analysis complete. In the next restricted briefing, we will examine how debt policy becomes geopolitical leverage, and how liquidity is converted into influence. Subscribe to Dark Power Index to access the next restricted briefing file. Access the data